Headlines about Iran often tell a simple story: bombings, aggression, and a nation bent on causing trouble. These stories dominate the news cycle, shaping how the world sees Iran and its people. But what if there's more beneath the surface, layers of history, fear, and survival that rarely make the front page? This narrative paints Iran as a rogue state, obsessed with power and regional dominance. It's a picture that's easy to accept, especially when images of military parades and stern-faced leaders fill our screens. But this version is incomplete. It misses the deeper reasons behind Iran's actions. Ordinary Iranians live with the consequences of these perceptions, often misunderstood by the outside world. To truly understand Iran, we must look beyond the headlines and political statements. We need to ask, what drives a nation to act the way it does, and what fears shape its choices? The real story is not just about aggression, but about deep-seated fear and a long history of isolation. Iran's sense of vulnerability is woven into its cities, its culture, and its politics. Traumatic events have convinced Iran's leaders that they cannot trust others for their security. Decades of threats and betrayals have left scars that still shape decisions today. Their military strategies and nuclear ambitions are, in their eyes, tools for survival in a hostile world. These are not just displays of power, but desperate measures to ensure the nation's future. The roots of mistrust go back further than the 1979 revolution, shaped by decades of foreign interference and betrayal. The 1953 coup, orchestrated by foreign powers, left a legacy of suspicion that endures to this day. Iran's actions, bombings, support for militant groups, are part of a calculated strategy to keep enemies at bay and prevent another devastating war. These choices are controversial, but they are rooted in a desire to avoid repeating the tragedies of the past. By exploring this hidden story, we can see the Middle East crisis not as a simple clash of good and evil, but as a tragic cycle of threat and reaction. Only by understanding these deeper motivations can we hope to break the cycle and move toward lasting peace. To truly understand Iran's military mindset today, you have to go back to the Iran-Iraq War, a conflict that left a deep and lasting mark on the nation's psyche. From 1980 to 1988, Iran endured a brutal invasion by Saddam Hussein's Iraq. The war brought unimaginable suffering, with hundreds of thousands of Iranians killed or wounded, and entire cities reduced to rubble. Iran fought almost entirely alone, isolated by the world, while Iraq received weapons, intelligence, and political support from powerful, global players. This sense of abandonment created a deep and lasting mistrust of the international community, fueling a belief that Iran could depend only on itself for survival. The use of chemical weapons by Iraq, and the world's silence in the face of these atrocities, convinced Iran that international laws and promises offered little real protection. Iran's leaders realized they couldn't match the advanced technology and resources of powerful nations in a conventional war, no matter how determined their soldiers were. The trauma of the war led Iran to abandon the idea of building a traditional army modeled after Western powers, shifting its focus to new strategies. Instead, Iran invested heavily in unconventional capabilities, developing ballistic missiles, supporting proxy forces across the region, and mastering asymmetric tactics to offset its disadvantages. The memory of chemical attacks, mass casualties, and international isolation forged a powerful sense of vulnerability and a determination to never be caught unprepared again. Iran's modern military strategy, focused on deterrence and self-reliance, was born from this crucible of suffering and survival. Its goal is clear: to deter stronger enemies, project power beyond its borders, and avoid another devastating conflict at all costs. Every major military decision since the war has been shaped by this legacy of trauma, mistrust, and the drive for self-sufficiency. Even today, the scars of the Iran-Iraq War continue to drive Iran's sense of insecurity, shaping its policies and its people's worldview for generations to come. After the Iran-Iraq War, Iran knew it couldn't win a conventional fight against stronger militaries, so it turned to asymmetric warfare, unconventional tactics to offset its weaknesses. Iran built a powerful ballistic missile program to deter attacks and threaten adversaries from afar. Its navy focused on small, fast boats to disrupt shipping in the Persian Gulf. Most importantly, Iran created a network of proxy forces, groups like Hezbollah, Shiite militias, and the Houthis. These proxies let Iran challenge rivals like Israel and the US without direct confrontation. The strategy, fight far from home, using allies to absorb risks and retaliate on Iran's behalf. This network gives Iran strategic depth and acts as a powerful deterrent. Any attack on Iran could trigger a multi-front crisis, raising the cost of conflict. For Tehran, proxies are a defensive buffer, not a tool for conquest. Iran's nuclear program is rooted in vulnerability, not just ambition. It began in the 1950s with U.S. support, but after the revolution and the Iran-Iraq War, nuclear capability became a perceived shield against existential threats. Secret enrichment sites, revealed in 2002, sparked global fears of a bomb and led to crippling sanctions. Iran saw nuclear capability as the ultimate deterrent. Countries with nukes weren't invaded, those without were. The 2015 nuclear deal, JCPOA, offered hope. Iran limited its program in exchange for sanctions relief. For a brief period, diplomacy seemed possible. But in 2018 the U.S. withdrew from the deal and reimposed sanctions, devastating moderates in Iran. Hardliners claimed the West could never be trusted. Iran resumed and accelerated enrichment, seeing nuclear advancement as a strategic hedge. The collapse of the JCPOA pushed Iran further down the nuclear path. The nuclear program became less about energy, more about survival. This cycle of mistrust and escalation continues to shape Iran's choices. Unable to match its adversaries' air power, Iran invested in drones, cheap, effective, and versatile. Drones and missiles let Iran and its proxies strike targets across the Middle East, challenging U.S. and Israeli dominance. Attacks are often claimed by proxies, giving Iran plausible deniability and complicating retaliation. This gray zone warfare keeps pressure on rivals while avoiding direct war. Iran's drone technology has become a major export, even reaching conflicts like Ukraine. The spread of cheap drones has changed modern warfare, letting smaller players challenge global powers. For years, Iran's conflict with the U.S. and Israel was fought in the shadows, through proxies, covert actions, and a web of deniable operations. The region simmered with tension, but open warfare was carefully avoided, as both sides tested each other's limits without crossing the ultimate line. That changed dramatically in January 2020, when a U.S. drone strike killed Qasem Soleimani, the powerful architect of Iran's proxy network and a symbol of its regional ambitions. His death sent shockwaves through the Middle East, raising fears of uncontrollable escalation. Iran responded swiftly with missile strikes on U.S. bases in Iraq, signaling both resolve and restraint. The world watched anxiously as both sides seemed to step back from the brink. But the rules of engagement had changed. This marked a dangerous new phase. The shadow war had burst into the open, and the possibility of direct confrontation loomed larger than ever before. Tensions escalated further in 2024 when Iran launched its first direct missile and drone attack on Israeli territory after an Israeli strike on its consulate. The conflict was no longer limited to proxies or distant battlefields. Most projectiles were intercepted, but the message was unmistakable. Iran was now willing to risk direct confrontation, even at great cost. In 2025 and 2026, after alarming reports of secret nuclear advances, the U.S. and Israel launched massive strikes on Iranian sites, killing Supreme Leader Khamenei and shattering the country's leadership. Iran retaliated with a barrage of missile attacks on Israel and U.S. bases, unleashing a wave of destruction across the region. The unwritten rules of shadow conflict were shattered, leaving both sides exposed and vulnerable. Direct state-on-state warfare erupted, a catastrophic outcome decades in the making, fueled by mistrust and cycles of retaliation. The cycle of escalation had finally boiled over, engulfing cities and civilians in violence and fear. The region was plunged into chaos and uncertainty as families fled their homes and humanitarian crises deepened. This was the tragic result of a broken system of deterrence, a stark warning of what happens when the boundaries of conflict are ignored. For decades, the West used economic sanctions to pressure Iran, hoping to force change. Instead, sanctions devastated Iran's economy but strengthened hardliners, especially the Revolutionary Guard. The regime blamed foreign enemies for hardship, rallying the population, and consolidating power. Sanctions undermined moderates and reformists, especially after the U.S. withdrew from the nuclear deal. hardliners use the failure of diplomacy to justify their distrust of the West. Rather than weakening the regime, sanctions fueled repression and deepened Iran's siege mentality. The Iran conflict has destabilized the entire Middle East, sparking an arms race and constant instability. Regional rivals like Saudi Arabia and Israel have ramped up military spending, creating a dangerous feedback loop. Attacks on energy infrastructure and shipping have disrupted global markets and driven up prices. Proxy wars in Syria and Yemen have spilled across borders, dragging in neighboring states. The risk of a catastrophic miscalculation remains high. Iran's strategy of asymmetric deterrence has created a permanent state of shadow conflict. The region, and the world, remains on a knife's edge, where one wrong move could trigger disaster. As we look at the aftermath of direct war, it's tempting to see Iran's actions as pure aggression, but the real story is more complex, rooted in fear, not just ambition. The trauma of the Iran-Iraq War, decades of sanctions and failed diplomacy, have convinced Iran's leaders that survival depends on powerful deterrence. Their military and nuclear strategies are defensive at their core, shaped by a sense of existential threat. This doesn't excuse Iran's destabilizing actions or repression at home. But, understanding the role of fear is crucial to breaking the cycle of escalation. Security built only on threats and deterrence is unstable, fueling endless conflict. The recent war is a warning. Without trust and diplomacy, the spiral continues. To step back from the brink, we must look beyond headlines and recognize the fear driving the conflict. True security will only come from the hard work of building trust where none exists.